At dusk on November 24, 1971, a Boeing 727 slice of ordinary flight becomes the stage for a flawless riddle. A man slides a note to the crew, calmly declares he has a bomb, and demands ransom, parachutes, and a path to anonymity. Hours later, he vaults from the airplane into a rain-soaked mountain night, vanishing into the Pacific Northwest's Black Forest with $200,000 in cash and a legacy that will outlive him. He's never caught. The money's largely gone. The truth remains elusive. The mystery isn't just about how he did it, it's about why a single man could outwit an era's procedures and then vanish into the fog with a question mark that won't die. We set our stage in the American Northwest, a region defined by towering pines, gray rivers, and a weather-beaten trust in aviation as a routine lifeline. On a routine domestic flight from Portland to Seattle, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 carried a cross-section of America's travelers, businesspeople chasing a moment of leisure, families cradling fragile plans, workers turning toward a late shift, and a crew trained to manage a cabin full of strangers who would never share the same story again. The cabin is a microcosm of early 1970s life. Polyester rooms of seating, the hum of the jet engines, the metallic scent of cabin air, and the soft, omnipresent buzz of the radio and intercom as captain, co-pilot, and a flight attendant crew navigate the miles between departure and destination. Security procedures are far from today's standard. The era's air travel feels intimate and accessible, with passengers trusting strangers and the airline to keep them safe in a way modern travelers rarely experience. The victims, composites to honor real lives without exposing individuals. In a true crime chronicle that respects privacy while honoring memory, we present 5 composite portraits built from the crisis's emotional heartbeat. These composites aim not to dismiss individual experiences but to highlight the impact on everyone involved with Cooper and those affected by the hijacking. The business traveler, a person racing toward a conference, juggling a briefcase and a timetable, who trusted the airline to move him safely from one city to the next. The caregiver, a nurse or aide traveling between shifts, someone who understands the fragility of life and carries a quiet hope that travel will bring respite rather than risk. The parent, a person who pilots a family's weekend plans, who imagines returning home with a better story for their kids, not a tale of survival in a night flight. The student or apprentice, a young person chasing a future, classes, internships, and the promise that each flight might be a step toward independence. The retiree, a traveler returning from a quiet week of visiting family or pursuing a hobby, someone who values routine and the simple certainty of getting from A to B. The backdrop, the era, the threat, and the moral drama. The Cooper hijacking unfolds at a moment when aviation is a symbol of global connection but also a target for fear. The early 1970s bring a new reality. Hijackings aren't solely about money, they're about forcing governments and airlines to negotiate under conditions of uncertainty and danger. The money, the parity of force, and the aim for a quiet life marked by risk-free travel collide in a single night. This isn't merely the case of a clever thief, it's a test of democratic systems under pressure, aviation security, law enforcement coordination, crisis communication, and the public's belief in institutions meant to protect them. The stagecraft of the Skyjacking, what the world saw on the ground. The aircraft, the crew, and the route. A Boeing 727 on a routine domestic run, with a crew trained to respond to emergencies and passengers who believed their biggest risk was a delayed landing, not a hijack. The plane's crew must balance protocol with improvisation, the fear of the moment with the need to protect everyone aboard. The demands and manipulation of the unknown. The hijacker's notes and his calm presence in the cabin reveal a mind confident in control, a plan that uses fear as a tool and timing as a weapon. The demands, money, parachutes, safe landing instructions, are a script designed to bend processes toward one dramatic exit. The moment of departure. A stairwell, a jump, a wilderness landing, and a trail that leads nowhere. The forest swallows a man who will become both legend and cautionary tale. A precise, audacious decision that would echo in policy, memory, and conspiracy theories for years. The moral spine, fear, trust, and accountability. This story isn't only about a clever escape, it's about the fragile threads that hold modern life together. trust in airlines and airports, confidence in government and law enforcement, faith in the safety of everyday routines. The unresolved question, who was D.B. Cooper, becomes a collective challenge to the idea that civilization can always protect itself from the most audacious acts. The narrative invites empathy for the human elements behind the headlines, the families who waited, the crews who faced an impossible countdown, the investigators who chased a lead that disappeared into the rain, and a community left with more questions than answers. We step into the cockpit of history just as the door closes on a routine flight and a plan begins to bend the rules of gravity, fear, and fate. This is not a single moment but a carefully staged sequence, a note passed with a quiet threat, a demand that rewrites a city's posture, and a jump that leaves behind a wake of questions that politics, law enforcement, and the public would chase for decades. The setting, a Boeing 727 over the Pacific Northwest. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 is a symbol of ordinary progress. A mid-century jet carrying passengers from Portland to Seattle, a quick hop that most travelers treat as a trivial bridge between meetings, reunions, and the small rituals of daily life. The cabin glows with the hangar blue of cabin lighting, the hum of turbines keeps a steady rhythm, and the intercom crackles with routine chatter about seating, weather, and arrival times. It's a world separated from danger by the thin barrier of airline discipline, yet peril is already taking a seat among the passengers. The cast, a cross-section of America in 1971. Our composites reflect the gravity of what it means to travel in an era when air travel was intimate, less guarded by the heavy certificate of security, and deeply woven into the national imagination. Among them, the business traveler, a professional whose calendar matters more than comfort, who relies on the flight for a timely move from one contract to another, and who believes in the reliability of a well-oiled machine, plane, crew, company, and country. The caregiver, a nurse or aide who uses the journey to bridge shifts, to keep a life in balance between patient care and personal duty, carrying a toolkit of compassion that travels as reliably as the luggage. The family figure, a parent or grandparent who looks to the trip as a thread of connection, back home, to a weekend with grandchildren, or to reunite with loved ones after a long separation. The student or apprentice, a young person learning the rhythms of independence, where a single flight can feel like a handoff to a broader world. The retiree, a traveler who values routine, a last-minute adventure, or a simple desire to see a child or a place long imagined. The night's omen, a note and a threat. It begins with a quiet exchange that never seems to belong to the ordinary flight. A passenger or a flight attendant notices a figure seated toward the back, calm, unremarkable in appearance, the kind of person who could blend into a crowd with the ease of a traveler who keeps to themselves. The man slides a folded note to a member of the crew, a note that bears a claim in simple terms but carries the gravity of life and death consequence. I have a bomb. The declaration doesn't merely threaten violence, it weaponizes the normalcy of flight, turning the cabin into a stage on which fear is staged as a policy question. What should be given to someone who can conjure a weapon from a promise? The demands, a bold, precise script. What follows is not random chaos but a carefully designed sequence that forces the airline and authorities to renegotiate the rules of safety in real time. The hijacker demands a ransom of $200,000 in cash, the kind of money that represents not just funds but a symbolic power to rewrite outcomes. For parachutes, carefully described, to ensure the exit could be made with a plan and a margin of safety, or at least the illusion of safety for the jump. A landing path to an alternative safe zone, a direction that would allow him to disappear into the wilderness and evade a modern security net. The crew's response, a balance of protocol and improvisation. The flight crew are professionals trained to respond to emergencies with composure, but this is something else. A crisis that demands an exhale of certainty and a long, careful breath. The captain, co-pilot, and flight attendants become part of a live calculus. How to satisfy demands while preserving life and keeping the passengers calm. They must operate within the command structure of the airline and the legal framework of crisis response, a dance between compliance and the ethical imperative to protect everyone on board. The turning point, Seattle as a temporary stage. The plane finally lands in Seattle, where the ransom is prepared and the passengers are allowed to disembark, leaving behind a handful of crew and security personnel to manage the rest of the operation. The hijacker's plan hinges on the belief that a delayed, careful sequence of steps will yield the outcome he seeks: a clean exit into the night. The money, the parachutes, and a map to a landing zone become the instruments of his escape, and the northwest skies become the corridor through which a man attempts to erase a lifetime of certainty. The jump, the most haunting, unresolved moment. With the aircraft high enough to require oxygen and low enough to make a survival claim plausible, the hijacker makes his move. He opens the rear door, tests gravity, and steps into the night. The exact moment, whether the jump was clean, whether he landed and disappeared into the forest, whether the parachute opened reliably or failed, remains a haunting ambiguity, a narrative hinge that cements the Cooper mystery as a riddle larger than any one person or incident. The forest swallows a man. The canopy of the Pacific Northwest keeps his fate hidden in the rain and the pines. The aftermath, a city stunned, a nation listening for a whisper. News travels at the speed of fear. In the wake of the jump, the itinerary fades into memory as investigators sift through the chaos of the moment. Radio chatter, eyewitness reports, and the evergreen question of how to locate a person who vanished into a landscape that is both beautiful and unforgiving. The people left behind, crews, passengers, families, and communities, face a future where travel will never again feel perfectly secure, where a single act of audacity can rewrite the way governments think about risk, and where the search for one man's identity becomes a search for what it means to trust in the face of uncertainty. The investigations spark clues, leads, and the stubborn hunt. After the hijacking, investigators follow a complex trail: ransom money traced by serial numbers, parachute evidence, flight path and weather analysis, and minimal clues about Cooper's identity. The FBI and a rotating cast of investigators chase hundreds of leads, from possible sightings to the rumor that a crewman or passenger might know more than they're saying. The case becomes a national obsession, a cultural touchstone for the era's anxieties about security, government transparency, and what it means to be brave in the anonymous world of air travel. The emotional beat, fear, awe, and the hunger for closure. Victims and survivors. The passengers who watched a quiet routine fracture into fear. The crew who managed a ship and a story that would stay with them long after the skies cleared. And the families who learned to live with the shade of doubt that comes with an unresolved tragedy. Investigators. A rotating door of federal agents, state and local officers, and civilian witnesses who carried a mix of skepticism, determination, and a professional sense that the crime of this audacity must be understood, catalogued, and explained, even if the answer remains out of reach. The community, the Northwest geography, mountains, rivers, and forests, becomes a stage for the collective imagination, a place where myths of the Skyjacker blend with the practical politics of aviation safety and security. The investigation, clues, suspects, red herrings, breakthroughs. We pull back from the night's theater to the longer arc, a nationwide chase that wove together airline security, federal policing, and a public increasingly hungry for closure. This is the work of turning fear into a pattern, pulling on threads that might explain how a single man could rewrite the rules of air travel, and whether that pattern points to one mind, several collaborators, or a fearsome, diffuse method. The following is a documentary tour through the clues that mattered, the suspects who haunted the imagination, the red herrings that nearly steered the inquiry off course, and the breakthroughs that kept investigators moving toward a truth that still feels partly veiled. Clue set A: the night's openers, the note, the ransom, the exit plan. The handwritten note and the demands. The hijacker communicates with the crew in plain language, presenting himself as a threat with a script, ransom money, parachutes, and a landing plan. The demands are precise, suggesting a mind that rehearsed a sequence, not a spontaneous act of violence. The note's tone implies a belief in leverage via fear and the illusion of control over a system designed to protect passengers. The ransom brief: $200,000 in cash, in small, unmarked denominations, organized to fit the captain's bag and the in-flight retrieval of authorities. The money is a symbol as much as a tool, proof that money can bend policy, accelerate decisions, and prompt a dangerous calculus about what must be surrendered for a safe exit. The exit strategy. The plan hinges on a jump from the aircraft, with parachutes deployed into an outdoor corridor that promises an escape route into the wilderness. The target landing zone. A region that would allow a lone operator to vanish while leaving little trace in a world still learning to grapple with a new era of mass air travel. The crew's calibrated response. The flight crew, trained for medical emergencies, turbulence, and routine security protocols, find themselves choreographing a negotiation, comply, de-escalate, and maintain as much calm as possible while ensuring the safety of everyone aboard. The tension is not just procedural, it's existential. How to preserve life while honoring the demands of a man who wields fear as a tool. Clue set B. The money, the trail, and the river of evidence. Serial numbers and the hunt for provenance. Investigators pore over the ransom bills, tracing serial numbers, cross-referencing with bank vault records, and mapping where money could have traveled from the moment the bag left custody to the moment it vanished from sight. The pursuit is meticulous, almost forensic in its patience, because in a case built on a single dramatic exit, every denomination bears a potential breadcrumb. The Columbia River find, 1983 bundles of the ransom money surface along the Columbia Riverbank, discovered by a family clearing riverbank debris. The bills are water-stained, frayed by time, but the serial numbers align with those paid to the hijacker. This discovery doesn't solve Cooper. It reframes the problem. A portion of the ransom survived in nature, while the rest remains elusive in the shadows of history. The find fuels a crucial realization. The case isn't simply about one man slipping away. It's about a larger system's vulnerability and how evidence can drift across time and terrain. The limited forensics of the era. There's no DNA, no modern traceable digital footprint, and limited handwriting comparison capabilities for identifying a hijacker in the cockpit or passenger manifest. What investigators have are ticket records, cockpit voice recordings, ransom coordination notes, and a geography of fear that maps onto a real-world aviation network. Clue set C. The equipment, the flight path, and the tactical veil. The parachutes and gear. 4 parachutes are alleged to have been prepared for the exit, with harnesses and parachute packs that could allow a jump with a plausible level of control. The equipment suggests planning, improvisation, and the detail in the demands implies a knowledge of how a jump would unfold at night. Wind, altitude, visibility, and terrain all factoring into the risk. The flight path and weather. Investigators reconstruct the flight's trajectory and meteorological conditions on the 24th of November 1971. The weather, visibility, and the plane's altitude would influence the feasibility of a jump and a successful rescue, or a successful disappearance. The analysis becomes a study in physics and probability as much as in human intent. The exit point and the forest. The scramble from the aircraft toward a horizon of firs and rain creates a geography of fear. The Pacific Northwest's rugged landscape makes it easy to disappear, yet still leaves traces like broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, boot prints, and challenges for pursuers. Clue set D. The suspects and the shadow cast by suspicion. The Dwayne Weber thread. Weber, a longtime figure in Cooper lore, became the subject of a private claim by his wife after his death. According to her accounts and later commentary, Weber allegedly claimed involvement in the hijacking, whispering that, "They said I did it." The FBI never corroborated these assertions with conclusive evidence. Weber's name endures in the narrative as a cautionary tale about how personal memory, family testimony, and official skepticism intersect in a high-profile case. The Robert Rackstraw arc. Rackstraw, a former military man with a talent for problem-solving and a history of undercover-like behavior, emerges in later investigative whispers and popular theories. Some researchers point to his technical skills, aviation familiarity, and willingness to work clandestinely as traits that would suit Cooper's profile. However, credible, verifiable evidence tying Rackstraw to the actual hijacking remains disputed, and the FBI has not named him as a confirmed suspect. The Richard Floyd McCoy influence. McCoy's 1972 hijacking, conducted with striking similarity in motive and method, casts a long shadow over Cooper's case. Some observers treat McCoy as a possible inspiration for the Cooper incident or as a copycat pioneer in hijacking dynamics. The official line remains that McCoy acted independently of Cooper. The cultural aftertaste, however, is a reminder of how a single successful tactic can cascade into a broader speculative fever. Other names and the crowded field of speculation, dozens of names, pilots, ex-military figures, and men with prior aviation ties, have appeared in newspapers, books, and online theories. The FBI's archival stance is cautious. The Cooper case remains unsolved, and while several individuals have been proposed as plausible players, none has achieved the level of verified culpability necessary for a legal conclusion. Red herrings. The noise that nearly drowns out the signal. The copycat trap. The case's notoriety invites imitators or misread connections, people who think the solution lies in a single mastermind rather than a more diffuse network of circumstances, or who try to retrofit unrelated crimes into the Cooper mold. The airline industrial politics angle. The era's security anxieties give rise to theories that the hijacking was a political or corporate coup, an attempt to reveal weaknesses in security safeguards or to destabilize air travel's operational rhythm. While real, these theories often rely on circumstantial interpretations rather than hard evidence. The confession by proxy path. Many witnesses and family members offer stories that seem plausible in their emotional charge, someone who spoke in a way that suggested knowledge of the plan, or a memory of a sudden departure by a seemingly ordinary traveler. The danger lies in treating memory as direct evidence rather than a human attempt to fill gaps under pressure. Breakthroughs and turning points. What nudged the needle? The public's appetite for a plausible culprit versus the truth's stubbornness. The Cooper case is as much a narrative about the hunger for certainty as it is about the hunt for truth. Breakthroughs in this sense come not only from physical evidence but from the ability to frame the question in a way that respects both the complexity of the event and the necessity of caution. The role of the FBI's cold case mindset. Over decades, investigators tighten the net around how to handle a mystery that resists closure. The Cooper case evolves into a study of distributed risk communication, and the social impact of an unresolved enigma on aviation policy and public imagination. The memorialization and the data-driven reevaluation. As new sources, books, interviews, archival releases surface, researchers reframe Cooper within the broader history of hijacking, security reforms, and the psychology of daring crimes. The what-if questions become a tool for understanding not just the crime, but the era it defined. The emotional core. Who felt it all? The passengers. They carry lasting memories of fear and solidarity, shared moments of calm amid chaos, and a front-row seat to a moment when the ordinary fakeness of travel was burned away by threat. The crew. The men and women who navigated a crisis with authority, empathy for passengers, and a pragmatic improvisation that saved lives even as the mystery grew deeper. The investigators. A rotating cast whose patience is tested by an endlessly elusive target. Their challenge is not simply to solve a crime but to maintain public trust in institutions while admitting the limitations of evidence. The community. The Northwest's many towns and forests become a living archive of fear, speculation, and eventual normalization, where the myth of the hijacker competes with a sober reality. Security must evolve, and truth is often a slow, collective ascent. Twists and turns, the story's engine. The silent return possibility. A few leaks, a rumor, or a clarified piece of archival material could tilt the narrative from unsolved to solvable, or at least more clearly framed. The Cooper mystery thrives on the tension between what is known and what remains unknowable. A memory that won't be quiet, even as new evidence arises and old rumors resurface. The Cooper case remains a living conversation in flight safety, geopolitics of the era, and the cultural psyche of risk. The community, the media, and the aftermath. The night of the skyjacking didn't end when the plane landed or when the ransom was paid and then disappeared into history. It lingered in the towns wired to the Northwest's airways, in living rooms where families waited for updates, and in the corridors of every airline and airport that wondered, with a mix of pride and trembling, how to protect people in the age of unlimited access to the sky. The community's response. Fear turned into vigilance, then into policy. A culture of watchful patience. After the hijacking, Northwest communities and neighboring towns learned to listen for the indicators of risk in a way that felt civic rather than paranoid. Neighbors checked in on one another, families started rehearsing simple safety routines, and local organizations coordinated information sharing efforts to protect travelers and crew without letting fear erase humanity. The crew, the passengers, and the human ripple, the people aboard the plane. Passengers who faced a forced selection between fear and cooperation, and crew members who balanced protocol with compassion, became the quiet backbone of a national narrative about resilience. Their stories, though told in fragments, illuminated the real cost of a crime that didn't just steal money, but trust. Community memory as a living archive. Small towns, cafes, and airports began to preserve the moment in memory and in practice. Local historians collect anecdotes, museums consider displays about airline security, and regional libraries remember the case as a touchstone for how a community reconstitutes safety after a public shock. The media's role, sounding board, amplifier, and sometimes a crucible. The press as witness and magnifier. Media coverage shaped what people believed about Cooper and the hijacking. Reporters chased leads with relentless energy, translating a complex, evolving event into a narrative accessible to millions. In the best moments, journalism explained how safety measures might evolve. In the most sensational, it fueled fear or hyped unverified theories. Rumor, speculation, and the burden of storytelling. The Cooper case invites a troubling truth about crisis storytelling. Information travels faster than certainty. The media's appetite for answers sometimes outpaced the facts, producing a chorus of competing theories, each colored by genre fiction, personal memory, or political context. The challenge for reporters and editors became clear: balance curiosity with accuracy and curiosity with restraint. Ethics in crisis reporting. The era's journalists faced a critical test. Could they inform without sensationalizing? Could they honor victims, even composite portraits, while avoiding speculation masquerading as fact? The better pieces offered context, how security reforms might work, how the public could participate in safety without becoming paralyzed by fear. Regulatory and aviation transformation, the world re-engineered for safer skies. A shift from ad hoc improvisation to system design. The Cooper hijacking catalyzed a broader rethinking of how airlines, airports, and regulators plan for crisis. The industry began to implement formalized crisis playbooks, standardized command channels, and clearer lines of communication between cockpit, cabin crew, ground staff, and authorities. Security measures that grew from fear into routine. The case underscored vulnerabilities in how passengers and crews could be protected without sacrificing accessibility. Over time, this translated into tighter security protocols, more robust identification and screening processes, and a nationwide emphasis on preventing and responding to extraordinary threats in ordinary settings. Policy debates that outlived the moment. The Cooper saga fed ongoing discussions about civil liberties, government power, and the balance between security and freedom of travel. While the specifics of procedures evolved, the central tension, how to protect people while maintaining the open, connective promise of air travel, remained a guiding question for policymakers. The cultural shadow, the ghost suspect as narrative force. A symbol of enduring uncertainty, the notion of a ghost suspect, someone who could have been involved, or perhaps a mind behind a plan but never proven, generated a persistent tension in public imagination. It wasn't merely about who did it, it was about whether certainty was ever fully accessible in a case where the evidence resided in memories, archives, and second-hand accounts as much as in physical traces. The memory as a tool for future safety. The ghost served a dual purpose. It warned against closure for closure's sake, and it reminded audiences that a threat, once contained in a single sensational moment, can reappear as a policy driver when the public demands safeguards. Victims, survivors, and the ethic of memory. Remembering without sensationalizing. The victims and passengers who faced the unknown remain central to the narrative's moral core. Their memory anchors the story in a commitment to humanizing a case that could otherwise become a string of headlines. The narrative honors their dignity, even as it acknowledges the limits of what is known. survivors as catalysts for change. For those who lived through the event, the experience translated into advocacy for changes in security culture, crisis communication, and the social contract around risk. Their testimonies, whether through interviews, diaries, or public statements, helped shape a more thoughtful approach to how society responds to shocking events. The resolution or enduring enigma. We arrive at the final chapter not with a single verdict, but with a sober reckoning. The D.B. Cooper skyjacking stands as one of the most audacious, memorable, and perplexing chapters in the history of aviation. It reshaped safety protocols and public imagination in ways that outlived the immediate drama, even as the identity of the man who jumped into the Cascade Night remains an unresolved hinge on which the case continues to turn. This section threads together what is known with what remains conjectural, honors the human stakes, and asks what a modern audience should remember about a mystery that stubbornly refuses to close. The closing facts, what we can know with confidence. The hijacking itself was real, spectacular, and meticulously planned. On November 24, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper, later misremembered as DB, commandeered Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, delivered a chilling demand for ransom, and leaped from the aircraft with cash and a dramatic dream of disappearing into the forest. The act was executed with a calm precision that suggested a mind at ease with risk and a readiness to exploit the moment's vulnerabilities. The definitive identity of Cooper remains unproven. Despite decades of investigation, dozens of leads, and a steady drumbeat of suspect theories, no one has been convicted for the hijacking or the paraphernalia associated with it. The FBI's official position over the years has been that the case remains open to new evidence but, in practical terms, unsolved. Public fascination persists, not because a solution is suddenly at hand, but because the riddle endures as a test of what evidence can and cannot do in the face of a vanished suspect. The ransom money and aftermath are a complex trace. A significant portion of the $200,000 ransom money eventually surfaced in the Columbia River region in 1980, found by a family who stumbled onto bundles in the riverbank debris. The serial numbers matched earlier records, confirming a direct link to the hijacking, but this discovery did not identify Cooper or provide a complete trail back to a living suspect. It did, however, crystallize a crucial truth. A single, audacious act can be both vividly remembered and frustratingly opaque in its afterlife. The case's legacy is not a single courtroom ruling but a revolution in safety culture. The Cooper hijacking precipitated sweeping changes in aviation security, cockpit security measures, standardized hijack procedures, improved communications between flight crews, ground teams, and law enforcement, and a broader public conversation about how to balance accessibility with security in a highly interconnected world. The story's impact lives in airports and airline policies as much as in memoirs and thrillers. The enduring enigma. Why Cooper endures as a cultural phenomenon. The ghost suspect as a narrative force. The central mystery isn't merely who did it, it's how a story can persist when the evidence is elusive. The ghost suspect works as a storytelling pressure valve, a reminder that some questions don't yield to certainty, and that fear, ingenuity, and culture interact in unpredictable ways. The figure becomes a symbol for the era's anxieties about security, technology, and the reach of individual daring. Copycat and cultural reverberations. Cooper's audacious exit created a template that influenced public imagination about hijackings, what a successful escape might look like, how a story can travel across borders, and how media and policy respond when a singular act redefines a whole industry. The cultural memory of Cooper isn't limited to the man himself but extends to the way societies talk about risk, resilience, and the ethics of surveillance. The memory economy of aviation safety. The Cooper case helped catalyze an era of policy design, crisis playbooks, passenger screening concepts, and the development of risk communication strategies that shape both government and corporate behavior. Even without a solved suspect, the event lives on as a proving ground for how a system learns from audacity and failure alike. The emotional core, who felt it and why it matters. The passengers and crew who lived through the night. Their memories are not just footnotes, they are the emotional anchor of the narrative. Their fear, courage, and instinct to protect others in a split-second decision, making environment demonstrate what resilience looks like in real time. Their stories, whether shared in interviews, journals, or recollections, keep the human stakes at the center, preventing the case from becoming a mere puzzle of facts. The investigators who refused to abandon the chase. The people who kept returning to the file folders, re-examining old leads, and weighing new theories demonstrate a professional ethic, that truth, even when elusive, deserves persistent pursuit, humility before unknowns, and transparency about the limits of evidence. The community and the nation that watched, learned, and adapted. The Cooper saga infiltrated everyday life in the Pacific Northwest and beyond, shaping how people perceive air travel, how communities participate in risk conversation, and how the public imagines security as a shared responsibility rather than a distant bureaucracy's burden. Twists and turns, the storytelling engine, reimagined for a 50-year horizon. The what if becomes a creative driver. What if Cooper had a partner? What if the money didn't all vanish and instead told a longer, interwoven narrative about the distribution network, black markets, or internal airline compromise? What if a piece of overlooked archival material finally provides a credible link to a named individual decades later? The imagination is not contraband, it's a tool for testing the boundaries of what counts as closure. The boundary between narrative and proof. The Cooper case teaches a documentary lesson. A compelling story can illuminate structural issues, security, transparency, and accountability without delivering a single, definitive culprit. The measure of success in retrospective storytelling is not always a courtroom verdict but a richer understanding of how society negotiates risk, learns from fear, and builds safeguards that endure. A future-oriented memory. As we remember Cooper, we also remember the people who built safer skies in the wake of the crisis. The memory becomes a living thing that informs current debates about aviation security, civil liberties in security policy, and the ethics of discussing unsolved cases with both reverence and honesty. The ending, closure through transformation, not confession. The resolution is not a verdict but a testament, a story that ends not with certainty about a person, but with a clearer understanding of how a single act can reshape systems, culture, and memory. The Cooper case closes a chapter on one level, yet the questions it left behind persist as a catalyst for ongoing inquiry, policy refinement, and the human commitment to vigilance in the face of the unknown. The Cooper saga invites us to honor the victims, the crew, and the investigators by respecting the limits of what is known while acknowledging the real-world consequences of what remains uncertain. Consider how fear can drive progress. The leap from crisis to reform demonstrates a crucial truth. When fear is met with thoughtful, transparent action, it can yield improvements that protect millions. When fear is exploited or left unchallenged, it can distort justice and erode trust. Recognize the power of inquiry. The enduring appeal of D.B. Cooper lies not only in the missing body or the missing identity, but in humanity's persistent desire to understand a mystery that refuses to be fully solved. The story invites ongoing curiosity, rigorous scholarship, and responsible storytelling that refuses to sensationalize tragedy.